in the sense that I don't have to find 200,000 patients or 20,000 patients to do a study. Well, we can do it with 10, 15, or 20. And there is also ability to charge more and things like that. So for different reasons, we're kind of moving more towards it. And this study kind of shows that that's happening as well. And there's increasing competition across the board, irrelevant of what disease state you're in. There is always a competition, either a drug that's already on the market, or something that's right on its tail. So there's a lot of competition going on in that space. And then there is also a decline in the amount of money you can make per drug, because the amount of time it takes for you to hit your peak sales is going down. So let's say, for example, you're estimating you have about 7-year patent life or 8-year, 10-year patent life, and you're thinking you're going to hit peak market about 7 years or so. Now that number is changing. It's getting less and less because of generic competition, because of other drugs, competition coming. So you have to make sure your launches are done well the first time around. Because trust me, a relaunch is never as good as a launch. It means you failed on your launch. There's also a growing payer influence because payers are now becoming more restrictive. You may not get your product the way you want it and the formulary tiering that you want. And of course, there's also an increase in the decline of access you can have to your physicians and the hospitals. And, with COVID and things of that sort, it just makes it even more harder to get into the hospitals and things like that. I was fortunate to actually have had the chance to launch a product during this COVID situation where it was almost virtual, right? So we, of course, by the time we were about to launch, we were able to get some, feet on the ground with some reps and things like that. But we were planning on a 100% virtual launch, and we kind of launched in that manner, and it was successful as well. So why are drug launches unsuccessful? Detroit did, the Deloitte study, we'll look at it more closely in a little while, but there are several reasons that a drug launch actually fails. And the first year forecast, if they don't hit that first year forecast, chances are they're going to keep going down. And there are many factors, that are controllable by the pharmaceutical industry. We'll look at a few of them. First one is limited market access. As we already said, that's about 50% of the reason. And unfavorable placement on a formulary. So, for example, if you were thinking, you're going to get a very good formulary status and you don't get it, or you have to jump through hoops like getting step edits because it's too high of a price, or the patient cost sharing, all of these things play a key role. There's also, if you have weak health economic data to support your price. So if the price cannot be substantiated by what the value story is or what the value of something is that you bring into the equation, again, that plays a huge role as well. And there's also higher expected expenses, discounts, and rebates. So you may end up having to give a lot more than you thought you would keep in order to be able to get that formulary status within these different formularies. So with that said, it kind of shows that 36% of all drugs fail to meet market expectations because you also sometimes underestimate the market, and the customer needs. So you may think that, so that means you didn't do the proper diligence during your pre-launch work to kind of know really how big is the market, how big is the need, can you substantiate a price? Are you understanding the patient's population's need? Is there a high prescriber need? Is there a lack of enabling therapy conversions, which means if somebody's already on a product, what advantage that your product or your mode of giving it makes it even more feasible for that change to take place. So, for example, if a medication is given daily, 3 times a day, and if your product can go once a week, that can offer the edge. Or if something is given IV and now it can go IM or sub-Q or something to that effect, where the patient can take it on their own, that kind of changes it. So when those things are not done right, and that's kind of when you see that these things don't go very well. A couple of the other things that are also associated with it is poor product differentiation. Again, a key to any product's success when you bring it into the market is how different is it? Why is the mechanism of action any different? Is the mode of delivery any different? What makes it more competitive in the market? what gives it the value to the provider who's giving the drug or a patient who's receiving it, or is there any advantages to the family because they need to give less care? All of those things become important. Unfavorable safety profile, again, safety is trumps efficacy. So if you have a good drug that's efficacious, but it's not safe, we're not going to get it into the market. So unfavorable safety profile also plays a big role in making sure that you have successful launches and things like that. Low prioritization or insufficient resource allocation, again, comes down to understanding how to launch a product. If you wanted to put a field medical organization in the field, are you putting the right number? Are you putting the right talent? If you're thinking about assessing the number of reps you need, are we going to call on primary care? Are you going to call on specialties? You have to make sure that you have efficient and effective resource assessment done beforehand. So when you launch it, you're doing a good job and making sure. But when that's not done right, there's a good chance that you would fail as well. Unexpected events, things that are out of your control, like some litigations that may happen from another setting, or you can have some manufacturing delays, right now with COVID and, not being able to get core material that you need. You may not have the material resources to be able to do it. All of those, we need to kind of think about it before you can make sure that a drug is, successful. So next slide. Just a closer look on a Deloitte study. We'll kind of go into the details of it, and kind of look at what did they find. So the first thing was variability of launch performance. This kind of tells you that if you do a good job at the front end, there's a good chance that you'll do well on the back end. So out of the 149 launches that Deloitte looked at, 65% of those drugs were specialty drugs. That kind of tells you, look at the trend where it's going. Even now, when you hear the news, market, things that are coming into the market, you kind of see there's a lot more emphasis on specialty product drugs, than primary care drugs, which wasn't kind of the case a few years ago, because most of the drugs you hear about are, cholesterol meds, hypertension meds, asthma drugs, and all of a sudden now you hear things like, gene therapy or a specialized drug for, some rare diseases and things like that. So the trend is also, going towards that direction. And the Deloitte's first finding is that there is a large variability in drug launch performance. So what that means is some companies are still doing really well, and then there are other companies that are not doing well. So it also comes back to proper planning, and why we do things the right way will make a huge difference. 1/3 of the drugs failed to meet their first-year performance goals, right? But more than half of them actually beat it, and about 26% of them actually even surpassed it, right? And that's they actually doubled more than what was expected of their first-year revenue, right? So that's the key. That variation is important because it tells you there are companies that are doing extremely well in launching drugs. There are companies that are doing, what they thought they would do, and then there are other companies that are failing to do it, which all comes back to, if we do it right the first time and we do our planning right, there's a good chance we'll get there. So the second one that they looked at is first-year sales performance actually indicates your future sales performance. So what that meant is when they looked at the companies that did well in their first year, they continued to do the same thing quarter over quarter in their second and third year as well, right? So that it kind of sends that pattern, right? So if your drug sales and prices are, and your company's performance is like this, then it's kind of following that as well. But on the flip side, 36% of the companies that missed their first year goal kept kind of falling back as well. And because when you look at their second or third year, it kind of went in that same direction as well. So that makes sense, because if we remember what we talked about, when launch fails, if a company has not done their adequate homework and things of that sort, you kind of continue to kind of fall in that hole, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. So like I said before, a relaunch is never a great launch strategy, which means whatever you did to launch your drug in the first place, you didn't do it well enough, that now you're going to have to relaunch your drug, and that's never a winning strategy. So the third thing they look at is priority review FDA, which is done by the FDA, specialty and orphan drug outperform their competition. So we already said, the trend is kind of going more towards more of these rare disease drugs and specialized drugs and things of that sort. And 65% of those drug launches kind of went in that direction. And that's significant because it's one of three characteristic features or factors that are associated with a strong drug launch success. So the first thing is, as we said, is receiving priority review by the FDA. 2 is specialty drug, as I mentioned before, and 3 is orphan drug status. So most companies during their development will try to get all 3 of these, right? So if I can get a priority review, and I was fortunate, I've been on a few products where it had priority review, it was a specialty drug, and it has an orphan drug status, and it was a successful launch. So these things kind of add to that equation as well. So if you kind of look at this data on this slide, 7 out of 10 of these 3 types of drugs met or beat market expectations in their first year revenue, while their counterparts were less likely to get that same effect. 2 other characteristics, as we saw, was biologics and first-in-class drugs also showed similar success, but not at the same degree. But it's also important to note because those drugs also seem to have, so if you're a company or looking for acquisitions, or if you're looking for BD opportunities, it also kind of makes you wonder the types of drugs or products or companies that we should be looking for. So when I talked about the environment for drug launch changing at the beginning of this webinar, it kind of showed like it's clear to see how companies have been investing in specialty and rare disease drugs rather than primary care drugs in terms of both launches and also clinical development portfolio, and also in terms of BD opportunities that they look at. So the next thing we're going to look at is 4th thing that they looked at was large companies are less likely to meet market expectations. And that's kind of weird because when you look at that, you would actually think, hey, a large company probably kind of has this engine working so well that they know how to launch products, and so when they put something on the market, it gets successful, right? Because they have this engine, but it's not actually the case because large companies don't strive as hard, in my opinion, as smaller companies, because if you're a one product company or you need to make sure that a product is successful, you put a lot more into the pre-work, making sure what the competition is, you're doing the pricing, you're doing all of the things that need to be done. So this was, that was surprising for me when I looked at it. And according to a study, small, mid-sized pharma companies are consistently showed better launch performance, including in all 3 drug categories that I discussed before. And when you look at some of these drug characteristics for small companies, you can see pretty sharp differences in performance compared to larger companies. 92% of orphan drug launch by small companies met or beat expectations. That's a huge number. 85 to 81% of priority review and specialty drugs, respectively, launched by small companies also outperform well. And if you also see mergers and things like that happening, large companies go gobble up these smaller companies that have performed really well. And again, it may not follow that trend because all of a sudden you try to take them and put them into your kind of making things, and it may not work as well. So, that lean mentality, that, doing your homework, looking at all of the research seems to be paying off, for these smaller companies. Larger companies that launch orphan drugs, only 53% of them actually met or beat expectations. They speak to that priority issue that I was talking about, and that's smaller company will inevitably have the highest priority because it's kind of important for them to make sure that they're successful in their launch. Smaller companies also have like a deeper focus and emphasis on diseases, in which the drug launches. So the pre-work that's done, the pre-launch work that's done in kind of educating their people and kind of, talking about the mechanism of action, the disease state, all of those become important. What this kind of tells you is that cross-functional coordination that's necessary to be able to do in drug launches may not be as effective in a larger size company than it is in a smaller to mid-sized company. But again, it's a process. So even the larger companies, if they do it right, you can be successful in all of these launches, irrelevant of if it's, the kind of company you're dealing with and the product that you're dealing with. So the next thing is kind of the reasons for missing, market expectations. So now when Deloitte looked at the 54 drug launches that failed to meet expectation, again, it looked at all of it, then it looked at all the ones that were successful, and then it looked at all the ones that were not successful to kind of look for trends, to see where is it failing and why is it failing and what actually went wrong. And if you do have data to support these things, right? So the limited market access stands out as the top reason for launch failure. So half of the launches face limitations in reimbursement, getting the formulary exclusion or required step edits, or were high priced, and a patient cost sharing, was difficult. So market thing seemed to be the highest. The next highest for the unsuccessful launch was kind of market understanding. Often these companies underestimated the difficulty of converting these patients that were already on a previous drug that works, because they couldn't show how exciting or how great this new therapy would be in terms for themselves or their patients, and things of that sort. So that speaks to the next highest reason, that the company failed to differentiate the drug, for existing therapy, which is patients and physicians needing some type of a value proposition or a compelling story behind it. And when you lack that, or if a company couldn't find that and kind of bring that as their talking point, it kind of led to their failure. And some of that fault lies in their clinical development process, or not having a good, what are you looking for at the end of the day when you finish your trial? What's the value statement that you're trying to create? What's the target profile that you'll create? The commercial needs to kind of play a role early in those kinds of situations, because when you get a PI at the end of the day, and if you can market that, your commercial organization can market it effectively, then all of that development results in a product that can't be successful. So that cross-functionality between the teams, becomes really important. And us kind of understanding where other companies are failing also helps you determine, what needs to be done right. So next slide. So what are the real takeaways, So let's kind of summarize quickly the Deloitte study. So the real takeaway is that companies that have a lot more control in determining their drug launches and take advantage of it and resource it appropriately, usually, which you see that in smaller companies, do well. The smaller companies are more dedicated, more focused, and their resources are kind of focused towards the launch. And they play a huge role in how drug reaches the market and whether it sees the market uptake that's kind of forecasted, as you would see it. So a couple of more slides, just to kind of give you look at a bit of the solutions on, what can be done. You need to have, in order to be successful, really, you need to have a end-to-end strategic plan. The solution to improving drug launches is not really a secret, because you already saw, quite a few companies are not just hitting their target, but they're actually doubling it, right? So the pharmaceutical companies that know what they need to do generally and to have a successful launch, but sometimes competing interests within the organization, causes them to focus their resource in other areas. So they don't focus on the launch, which can result in, failure, right? So end-to-end strategic planning, put in the work, figure out what the need is, figure out what the market needs, figure out the disease state, figure out the areas of gaps within that, disease state, the therapeutic area in which you're focusing on, in which you can develop products that will become a market leader. Just don't go after a product because you think you can get it into the market. Go after products that actually have a need, that will actually fulfill a patient need or a physician need or a convenience need, things of that sort. But the key is to have proper planning, leverage the relationships that you have with your KOLs or thought leaders, gain insight from the market that gives you that competitive edge, and work cross-functionally to get to that strategic endpoint. And, I think we'll discuss that a little later, but that's kind of the key there. A portfolio strategy, again, as I mentioned before, develop the strategy that allows your team to prioritize, and also that you focus on products that are within your portfolio or within your current areas of expertise. If you're already an established company, but if you're a new company, find that right resources to incorporate and develop compelling value propositions for patients, physicians and payers, so they will switch to your new drug that you're trying to bring into the market. So deep innovation, so looking at some solutions, how to excel on drug launches, you have to develop innovative approaches to understanding the market need. So I talked about the need to incorporate the target product profile, discussion in the clinical development plan, but now you need to kind of translate that over to what is that commercial lead. Like I said before, I always say this all the time. It's not about getting a product approved and getting a PI, that's out there. It's getting a product approved that you can market, and a product that actually adds value, to your patients and physicians and things like that. So lastly, disciplined execution is the key. Don't take your eye off the ball. Cross-functional support is critical for a successful launch. It's how, as a company, you can communicate a unified message, irrelevant of if it's coming from commercial, medical, your external, KOLs or thought leaders who are speaking on your behalf. All of that's important. You need that statement, that scientific story, that value story, that health economic story that aligns across the board. So speaking of the importance of cross-functional collaboration, I want to kind of transition this off to Glenn and Michael, who have a lot of experience in launching drugs. I think Ilio mentioned something like 150 something, products into the market. I think they'll give us they'll give an overview of who they are, what they do, and also to kind of, as I'm one of the board members on the ACMA, and I think there is a excellent certification launch program that we have that's offered, by ACMA, which we'll also discuss a little later. So with that, Elio, I want to pass it on to either you, Glenn, or Michael.
Great, thank you so much, Ravi. And yes, we'll turn it over here to Glenn and Michael so that they can discuss the Agile framework that they're so familiar with in terms of launching drugs.
Thanks, guys. So medical affairs, your time is now. Never before has medical affairs faced such a period of ambiguity, change, and opportunity. Today, Mick and I are going to go through that evolving role of medical affairs. We're going to explore some of the benefits of an agile mindset and the ways of working. And we're going to talk and explore a little bit around the power of co-creation to maximize customer value. Agile and agile ways of working, we've seen all ends of that spectrum. We've seen organizations that have gone truly agile with a whole structure and put the whole enterprise behind it. We've seen parts of R&D that have tried agile launches and structured the teams around this as well. And we've seen discrete teams, intact teams who have also tried to apply agile. The sweet spot for us, the one that we've seen the most success, is in product launches and in particular medical projects. We'll go through this in a little bit more detail as we go through. Elio, can you just move to the next one, please? So what have we observed? So we're working with many global launch teams at the moment, and it astounds me that the individuals that are coming to our launch teams that we're involved with, many of them have less than 5 launches. In actual fact, the last couple of launch teams that we've been involved, some of them, it was their first or second launch only. And even the launch lead, it was their first launch. Why? And this, I think, Ravi's talked through it, that some of these larger companies, you could be working in a large company for a period of time and they've not had any launches for a period of time. And what we're seeing this, obviously, we've seen this more and more, that you might be, just through the lack of opportunity, not been involved with one of your company's launches, but you're now being asked to be part of that next great hope for growth of your organization. The other thing we're observing and we're seeing is this evolution of the medical affairs role itself. Traditionally, when I sat in a lot of and I looked after the medical affairs for Europe for one organization at one point, the medical affairs team were always very well appreciated as the subject matter experts. They were sitting at the table, and very often we would be throwing questions and we were expected to answer it on our subject matter. More and more what we're seeing now, what we're observing is that the medical affairs people are leading the project launches or the medical projects, and they're now having to lead other subject matter experts. They're having to influence and actually lead people. So new skills and new capabilities are actually required. If we go on to the next slide, please, Elio. So the new capabilities that we think are required and will be required beyond 2021. that evolution of, as we said, being just the subject matter experts, but to those skills of being able to lead those cross-functional teams, being able to be not the person that always has the answer, but being able to ask the question and be a servant leader for others so that the project moves forward or that the launch moves forward as well. We're seeing, we've had a lot of success. So that, as we said, the last 10 launches we've done with an agile way of working. And I think what we've all experienced in these last 18 months is we've had to think and act differently. And shifting that mindset to be able to adjust yourself depending what is happening in the market, what is happening with regulators, or what's happening with the competition, and being able to adjust your plan in a very iterative way and very fast is not just it's actually essential for success moving forward. And I think those capabilities of you being able to show and have business agility will be something that medical affairs roles in particular will require going forward. Medical affairs have always had a lot of things to do. We've always had thousands of different balls in the air at a time. And the importance of being, understanding strategic focus and prioritization and being able to actually work in this way will be essential as you go forward. These are the capabilities that we're all going to require for success in the future. Communication. So working across functional teams, as Ravi has pointed out before, is absolutely crucial for this. And the ability to give clarity and visibility and to also be flexible across that team and across functions and with your stakeholders, both internally and externally, are also absolutely critical capabilities that we're going to require moving forward. Mick, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I mean, everyone on this call, I hope you've been in a launch, because launching is one of the most amazing things in your pharmaceutical career. It's where you have fun, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of stress because it's such an important thing, as Ravi was saying earlier. I think where it's moving to is you're going to be agile or fragile. And what I mean by that is if you've got an agility to the way you work, and Ravi talked about small and medium companies being a bit more agile and getting their processes passed. And as you can see, the image on the left, the lady mountain biking, this is like a launch or a big medical project. You know where you start, you know where you're going to finish. On the way down, there's obstacles, there's rocks, there's logs, and you're having a really good time, but you're going at a fast pace. This is what's happening currently. Working on a couple of COVID molecules over the last year and a bit, you have to work in parallel. You can't work in sequence anymore. You've got to be talking and working at such a speed, but it's a fun speed. So this agile, fun speed is where launches are now. We've proved it in the pharmaceutical industry. We know it can happen, so we don't need to go back. The image on the right is Old Faithful, the geezer. That's where we used to be. We used to plow along, ask for recommendations on how to launch. If we keep doing launch in the same way we used to, what's going to happen is the speed at which big data comes along, recruitment, phase 2, fast tracks, they're all going to creep up on you so fast that if you're not an agile flowing company, the competition's going to come behind you and you're not going to be able to deliver that product to your customers as fast as you want. So my thing in 2021, 22 is if you're not agile, you're probably going to be fragile. And let's talk about what agile means. So agile in medical affairs. Agile's been around for about 20 years in the IT industry. And how it came about was, it came out when a bunch of people got together and they said, well, all our projects are going over cost. And you probably hear that from medical as well. Well, they're going over time. We're too busy and we're not working as a team well. And they're going, how do we solve this? And we all want to solve this for any medical project, for any launch. And so they came up with these 4 agile values, which are part of the Agile Manifesto. So let's go from left to right and have a chat about them. The first one is customer focus. I know in pharmaceutical we are customer focused, but this is about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. It's saying one is better than the other. Now, customer collaboration or co-creation is an amazing thing, an untapped entity in pharma, where we can really understand what the customer needs and deliver on that. I mean, if you're making patient safety materials, and instead of just making them for 4 months and then deliver them, why don't you iterate as you go and show skeleton models of what you're doing, and as you go, show the improvements to the customer. You'll come out with the best possible product, other than showing them at the end as a negotiation. Number 2 is action orientation. I've never worked so much fun and so fast in launches as I do in Agile launches. I've worked on over 35 launches, 20 years in pharma. But these launches in Agile are so much more fun because it's about products and services that work over documentation. So you want to, instead of focusing, you want to focus on real problems, solve them. And if you got a product or a service that works, such as a patient support program, and instead of waiting a couple of months and then finally showing the doctor or the patient group what you've got, why wouldn't you have the product and make sure you iterate on that as well, and keep, at the end of a sprint or over time period, you keep showing them the product that works, and they go, yep, that's exactly what I wanted. The next one along is adaptability in uncertain times. Now, we are in very uncertain times at this moment. So responding to change is important. And I think change will always happen, whether it be government or regulators or competition or your data, something will always happen. Because if you write a plan, like below that, I used to write a lot of launch plans, 70 pages, 70 PowerPoints on a launch plan. As soon as I'd finished it, it would be out of date because something would happen the next week. Working in the COVID environment, like we have been, something happens the next day. And so you've got to respond to change and iterate and reprioritize rather than following a plan that works for a long time. And that's the beauty of Agile. And finally, empowering teams. Get a team, trust them, empower them to make decisions. Don't always have to report up everything, but empower that team interacts and they speed along making decisions by themselves, other than following a process that lasts for a couple of months to make a decision. And they're the teams, and I think this is why the small and medium companies are launching well, to Ravi's point, is because those teams and interactions are small and they've got a really nice, slick system. So this is about trust and collaboration. So these are the 4 values of the Agile Manifesto, and I think you'll agree they're really cool. Go next slide, please. So we've talked about Agile, now this is about co-creation as well. Now, if you think about producing a medical material or a medical document or a medical education material, think about the top row. This is what we traditionally do. The customer asks us, I want to get from this point 10 miles to my work. And you go, okay, let me think about it for a few months. And you get the wheel, you get the axle, you get the car, and eventually you deliver a car, which is on the top row. And they go, well, that's good. You've solved my problem. Wouldn't you rather do the bottom row, where you can send an MSL out in the field to test stuff, or you can go out as a medical person with all your touch points and make sure all along the way you're improving and iterating. By the time you get to the final product, which is the convertible car, because they wanted something that was fun and breezy, then you've produced an even better result. So co-creation is amazing. And I think you have the power as medical people to do this so well. Next slide. So the power of co-creation is the second element we're going to talk about. And I think medical affairs has the best amount of ability to co-create with all your customers. And let's talk about a few. Now, if you're launching a new brand, you've got a 1 to 2 year period of launch. All along that period, every month, you should be showing them how you're moving along, finding some innovation, talking to the HCPs, talking to hospitals, and you'll get a perfect product. You'll get something in the market that they want. The second one is patient access programs. Fancy producing a patient access program that's simple for the doctor. It's on the mobile phone. It reduces all the clutter. They like it. The patients like it. It's easy to do. If you do that with them, you'll probably produce that. Disease state awareness. If you've got a disease state you're going into and you want to co-create, why go out there and give them stuff that 3 other companies have given them? They don't need 4th. They want something new, something different, something that the customers always wanted, the patients always wanted. So co-create with them and give them that product. And another one, patient advocacy. You as medical people, you get to talk to so many people. And I think patient advocacy groups are a perfect example. They are so close to the patient, but next to the patients, and they will tell you, they know their patients. They're probably carers for their patients. So they're the great things about co-creation. Hey, Glenn, what are some of the things about co-creation you like?
Mick, I agree. Co-creation has been so good and could be so much more for pharma. We've been a little slow to bring it up. I think in some of the experiences I've had, teams that were creating new digital materials, websites, digital interactions, even testing these with your customers before you bring them to market, absolutely crucial. Bring them on the journey with you. Study designs, possibly some of the very early stage stuff has got the clinical, the people that we really want involved. But even in the phase 4 studies, if we could have our KOLs involved earlier in the study designs or the patient part of this as well, then you've got a much greater chance of success of hitting those outcomes that you really want. One of the things that I saw recently, and I was really quite excited about it, one of the launch teams that we worked with actually put an MSL from the field into the head office as part of it. And in a virtual way, we were able to do this. And they were using this MSL to go back and test different ideas that the launch team was thinking about. And I think that co-creation, that piece of the team coming up with an idea and saying we could go left or we could go right, and the MSL going and putting in front of a few customers in real time and feeding it back before the next meeting was so integral into the decision making and the process that the team took to making the next decisions. Some big ideas as well. If you would like to think about, transforming the health system or the hospital or the way that we're evolving and assessing products and projects, etc., as well with different stakeholders, these are the sort of things that you can co-create. And I think from our experience that, yes, outside of pharma, people have been doing this really well. Pharma have always sort of felt we keep it close to ourselves. We want to get something that's almost perfect, and then we give it to the market and they will come. The change for us in really and embracing co-creation and the power is not just on the drug, but all of the elements that surround the drug, you can also co-create. Go to the Mick, what?
Yeah, no, I agree, Glenn. I think if you look at the AstraZeneca Oxford University collaboration, that's a perfect example of how the pharma industry is doing this better. I think those sort of things in co-creation. But you as medical people, you probably have the most points where you can talk to people about this. So I reckon this is an amazing area in which you can really, really drive a medical project or a launch. You'll go to the next slide, please. So, I mean, we all love evidence. We all like our p-values and our statistics in our courses. So this is just some statistics on Agile. But, I mean, Agile projects are 3 times more likely to succeed. This is from Standish Group. I mean, 98% of Agile projects has helped them achieve project success. 98% from Atlassian, a multi-billion-dollar IT company. And 54% of companies surveyed confirm that Agile fosters collaboration. Cross-collaboration of medical, commercial, access, communication, regulatory. That's what you want in a company for a launch. You want this close, awesomely tight-knit team. So there's proof already that Agile works, and we've created a kind of a Agile hybrid model that'll work for pharma, and we think it's a fantastic result. Next model, please.
So the Pharma Agile team have come together. We've co-created with an international advisory board, trying to understand this evolving need of medical affairs, and particularly around launch. And what we've done is we've mixed the best of the foundational leadership qualities that will be required to lead others in the future with some of this Agile approach. And today, what you can see is we've touched on a little bit of some of the topics, but there are so many more topics that are out there, so many more things that can lead to people becoming more skilled and more confident in the way that they lead others and that they lead products and that they lead launches. The people who we've co-created this with ourselves, so Mick's mentioned co-creation, and we've talked about co-creation several times, is we've gone backwards and forwards with the global medical affairs leads, medical directors, CMOs, heads of commercial, and we've talked to them about what are those skills, what are those capabilities that their teams will require going forward. And the result was this course. And what we've done, and we're very pleased to partner with ACMA to certify this program. If you could just move to the next slide for me, please, Elio. And the promise of this partnership is we will transform pharma teams by accelerating business agility. And Elio, maybe if you could talk a little bit through the certification piece for us.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you, Glenn and Michael. So what we've done in developing the Launch Excellence Certification Program is we've collaborated with Pharma Agile because we want this program to be able to teach you how to apply the Agile processes to your medical affairs operations to support these product launches. So it's an online self-paced course. It consists of a series of video lectures that Glenn and Michael here are presenting. And the LEC program introduces an Agile hybrid model that highlights how medical affairs teams can work together in new ways and solve problems related to product launch. And because it's provided by the ACMA, as Glenn just mentioned, it's an accredited program. It's designed to instruct you how to support launches with fluid and flexible strategies. And then additionally, just before we get to our Q&A, I just wanted to reiterate that Glenn and Michael, your experience tops more than 40 years in the global pharmaceutical industry, supporting more than 50 launches at pharma companies, large and small, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Roche, Shire, Merck Serono, to name a few. So our learners, when you go through this Launch Excellence Certification Program, you're really getting expert instruction from leaders in the Agile space. So I encourage you to visit our course page on our website to find out more about the program. And you can certainly take some time now to ask questions about that as well. With that, I want to start going through the questions that have come through our Q&A panel, which all of our panelists here are more than welcome to answer. I think the first one refers to a question. The first question refers to something that Ravi brought up, which was about company sizes. And you had brought up that small companies are seeing a lot more success with their drug launches, and you talked a little bit about prioritization. Question is, do small companies also put resources into their launches in different ways, maybe compared to larger companies, to feed that greater success?
Sure. So what, in my experience, is the key differences between like large company and small company is that a small company looks at launch as a unit, okay, while a larger company, looks at it as a spectrum or a timeline. So they want to invest in it after you hit a certain, endpoint. You hit that, then you can get, the resources for the next one. But a launch doesn't actually work in kind of pieces. It actually all works together. In a small company, you have a field force, coming on. You have a medical team. You have, who will be out there already talking about the disease state, the mechanism of action and things like that, even before a product is out there. Right. So in a way, you're kind of all in a smaller company. So you're kind of putting in all of your resources in the right buckets, and you're trying to fund all of them to get to that endpoint. And on the other hand, I think in a larger company, it's kind of like, all right, once you guys get to this endpoint, then we will think about, funding it to the next level and get to what we need to do. So because of that, you have kind of gaps in your thinking, and also in the way you approach the real world as well. So the doctors don't kind of relate it all together, but normally in a smaller company, you would have scientific discussions happening well before, right? You may have a product in development, and if that's all the product they have, they want to get as much news out there as possible. So you're already getting the noise. Then the medical teams come in, they talk about the science and what's missing and the disease state even before your product. And then once your product reaches a certain point, they talk about MOA of the product and how. So it's kind of like a nice flow, but they are all working together all at once. And I think that's what makes that huge difference. Can big companies do it? Absolutely. It's a process issue. It's not the size of a company, or a resource issue. So it's more about how we think about a launch, how we think about a product, how we think about our patients, our customers, and then kind of design a strategy around.
I just want to add, I think the small companies are hungrier to find out what they really don't know.
Exactly.
And I think it's fantastic when they do. And when they do know what they find out, they focus in because their resources aren't as big. So they probably focus on stuff that really matters to the end user. And I think those two combinations with the smaller companies, but to your point, Ravi, I think big companies can do it, and some do it successfully. But the small companies, I reckon, are just more hungry. It's like a startup launch.
Yeah, I definitely get that. Another question that we've gotten, and I think all of you might be able to have some perspective on this, is what's the best way to prepare a medical affairs team for a launch?
I'll have a bit of a crack. I mean, yeah. I think you do need a long-term plan, but you also need the short-term iterative sprints as you go. So I just think plan, but don't plan for 4 months. Get on with some stuff. And I think the best thing you can do, like the co-creation, was get out and talk to your customers. Spend a month or two just finding out what they really want. And I think too many people start planning without really talking to the customers. I think for a medical team who has so many touch points on the ground and so many touch points on the phone with doctors and patient groups, I can just really talk to your customers to understand what they need before you start too much.
Mick, if I could add to that as well, I think when you're first kicking off a team, whether it be again a medical affairs team or a full project cross collaboration team, what we've found that really works is that spending a little bit of time and actually deciding as a team how you're going to work, what's important, how you're going to make decisions, what your team charter is, how you're going to hold each other accountable, how you're going to communicate. Really setting that up front really pays dividends later when the workload comes, etc. as well. And I think what we've found is the teams that actually discuss this and perhaps set that that frame up front become much more successful at actually delivering that action when the rubber hits the road.
No, great point. So to me, I look at it this way. Most people look at medical affairs as feet on the ground, right? That's just a small aspect of that whole medical affairs equation as it comes to launch. So the way I kind of look at it is there are 3 key things that you have to do, right? You have to generate data, you have to assimilate that data, and then you have to disseminate that data. So part of that generation of that data is to kind of figure out where are your gaps, right? That is you're asking your KOLs the right question, asking your payers the right question, asking off that space the right question, and what's actually missing? What's your competition look like? What are you trying to fill? And that's that data gap identification is your data generation. Now, you don't have to generate it immediately, but at least know where your gaps are so you can kind of spend your resources appropriately. Now, the generation piece of it, the assimilation piece of it is once I find these insights or whatever it is I'm creating from the outside world, how do I assimilate it in a format that makes sense for this launch team that you're building together? And that will help you kind of determine where your resources should be put in, right? So am I just looking for, 4 people in the field? Do I need somebody to give me some, payer insights or create some value stories and things of that sort? And then if we do get it, am I going to put them in publications? Do I need letters? Do I need to set up a call center? And all of those things become important on the second piece of it. And then the dissemination piece is two-way street, right? So pre-launch, you have a certain strategy and a pre-launch on how you're going to use your field medical organization. During the launch, they have a very different function. And then post-launch, they have a very different function, right? So being able to get your team ready for those 3 stages of the launch, irrelevant of when it's a field, is that key to that strategy or success. Because if you're only thinking launch and you don't think about what do I need to do for the pre-launch, or when it launches, what do I do? Or if I have a publication strategy, it's not about getting the publication out, it's the timing as well, right? Because you want to make sure your story about your product only comes out after your field teams have already talked about the gap and the mechanism of actions of different products that are needed to fill that space. That's when you want this thing to come out. So it's all about timing. It's all about that planning, and when do you get the right thing out and who are the right people to do it will determine if somebody's going to have a good launch.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Glenn, I think this speaks to something you had brought up where you mentioned the experience level of teams that in terms of the numbers of launches that they've done when you start to work with them is typically under 5. When you are introducing this Agile framework, this Agile mindset, what's the reception from folks in medical affairs when you're introducing this new way or different way of launching to them?
Yeah, great question, Elio. I think everybody deals with change in a certain way, and I think we've always found that for some people that there is resistance to any change. But what we've experienced is that many people who have been in pharma for a while, once they realize that they can do things in a different way, that they can be a little bit more iterative, and they can work in these 2-week blocks and really actionable deliverables, they love it. And as we said it before, the last 10 we've done our Agile, we wouldn't go back. Yeah, out of all of the launches we've done, we're not going back to the way we used to do it. Society doesn't allow us. So what they're demanding, we do it in a different way. So certainly we've seen the benefit. But the teams, the actual individuals, again, I think as long as you spend a little bit of time up front, you've really got to train people on this. This is new. It is a new way of thinking and doing things, particularly for pharma. And there are, I think when you spend the time in going through the courses and actually learning this as a new way of doing things, like you would with anything else, and you learn a new disease area, learn a new process. I think learning about Agile and learning how a team works together to be more effective, more efficient, and creating value for the customer, it's another part of that. And I think, as long as the individual members of the team actually come in with that attitude, with a growth mindset, and willing to learn, then yes, they certainly can. And they've appreciated it. The ones we've worked with have certainly appreciated it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn said it very well. You learn from your mistakes, and it's actually quite expensive to make these mistakes. So if you can learn from other people who have done this for over time and know the right way to do it, I think that's going to ensure that it's successful.
And having a mindset that says I can try it and I can then pivot and try something else. I think that mindset of going through a launch, especially with the COVID launches recently, we were working on something and we'd change the next week because something would happen in the market. So I think if you've got this mindset of willingness to change, I think the medical team can really prosper in this environment.
Great.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your thoughtfulness in delivering these remarks today during this webinar. Glenn Pierce, Michael Harries, Ravi Tai, thank you again. I want to thank all of our attendees. The next steps, we will be finalizing the recording for this webinar. We'll be posting it onto the ACMA YouTube page, and we'll certainly share out the link to that to all of our attendees and registrants who were unable to make the webinar today. With that, I want to just wish everyone a great afternoon, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Bye.
Bye.